Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Dennis Giannoutzis. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutzis.
I think I'm a serial entrepreneur. I have been growing businesses these last dozen or so years in the gig economy. And my latest venture is Movo, which is an HR platform for the frontline workforce.
Awesome. Movo, what a cool name.
Thanks.
Where did that name come from?
A lot of ideation. It was important to us to keep it short and sweet. And I think with that type of technology made up startup name, it gives you a lot of room to put into the brand what you want the company to be. They are blank slates. And that was really the approach we wanted. And there are things in there, mobility, vocation, these kinds of things that are very much tied to the future.
And is your organization mainly in the US or is it elsewhere as well?
We're fairly global for an early stage company. We are doing business in Latin America, Eastern Europe, as far east as Turkey, and quite a bit in the US as well.
Very good. And tell me, so we're talking about leadership today. We're going to be talking about it through the lens of leaders at first, and then we'll change lenses later on. But the first question I've got for you is, how did you get into leadership?
I got into leadership through early job experiences. And I think largely in the way that a lot of people do, a little serendipitously, where I was responsible for a function or a piece of business and needed to step in to make sure that things went well.
Yep. And what was that like for you, that experience of having to step in to make sure things went well?
A little scary at first. I'd say close to stage fright or that sort of butterflies feeling when you're about to perform in a very new way in front of a lot of folks. I think the business experience, I was as a kid as well. I played in a lot of different groups. And I think that experience is similar, that initial feeling.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are listening to this episode as well. They probably go through that too. I think it's a good thing though, when you get that nerves, right? That sort of helps you. One is because you do care about it going well. And two would be that it's just a great thing and it just gets the blood flowing. Because if it wasn't there, then it'd probably be pretty flat.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good thing. How did you cope in the sense that, were you given training? Were you developed as a leader or were you just thrown into the deep end?
A little bit of both. My own personal background is I came up poor with a single mom, a 16-year-old single mom. And I think I just had a lot of work experience very early on for probably most people's standards. And part of that is it can be you're left to your own devices. It depends on, I think a lot of times too, when you're coming up and you're working an entry-level job or a relatively junior job, your immediate supervisor is pretty junior. And I think that leads a lot of people when they get those first leadership experiences to not have a lot of supervision and need to figure out quite a few things on their own. I'd say I had one extremely robust sort of mentorship program, more structured program early on. And that was my college years. I worked all through college and graduate school. And I had a wonderful kind of ad hoc apprentice program that a company put together for me when I was in college, summers during college, and the work that I did for them during the school year. And that really helped. They got me exposure to some more senior level folks and some international business exposure and a lot of things that I learned during those years, and really more structured, more support than anything I had seen at that point.
And it's wonderful when you do have that opportunity because, as you said, the structure and so forth and support, but also the access to various people who have been there, done that, successful. Hopefully they're successful in what they've done. But of course, they've probably learned a lot as well. So it just means you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of people that don't actually have exposure to that. And is there anything else you might have done as well outside of that mentorship program? Anything you did personally to try and help you develop as a leader?
I had just a lot of interests, and I thought a lot of leadership experiences that weren't particularly business experiences. I was leader in the Boy Scouts.
Mm.
I was leader in sports at school, team captain, team co-captain, those kinds of experiences. So I think a lot of those experiences are 100% relevant for the business world, and those same skills really carry over.
Yeah, cool. So there were things there already. So you did have that kind of
Yeah.
experience as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, the only thing I would add, Dennis, is I think growing up poor, for those who are out there that maybe come from modest means as well, I think one of the hardest things when you're first starting out too is may not necessarily have much of a support network. And particularly if you're growing up, as I did in a rural part of the world, that can be really hard. So it really is super important to get that support, to find that support, to reach out. I made my early mentorship experiences were all folks that I had worked really hard to network with, or back in the day had written them a cold letter saying I really wanted to work for them. And these were the things I thought I could learn. And those kinds of things definitely work.
Ah, nice. So there it is, listeners. There's an example, maybe writing a cold letter, as Jason's just called it, or a letter that you can send out to people saying, hey, quite
Yeah.
keen to come and work here for you or with the organization. Because a lot of people tend to nowadays, Jason, wait for opportunities to come to them. Or they will they'll apply online for a job and they sit there with their arms folded, looking intensely at their screen, waiting for that job to say, ta-da, congratulations, you've got the
Right.
job. A, it doesn't work like that. And B, you just got to get out there and do it. But I think it's a great opportunity for people to do that, is actually apply or just send them a letter just to build relationships with people, to say, hi, I'm quite keen. And it'd be quite cool to see where that goes for some people. So listeners, give it a go. And Jason will say that it does work, and it does. And why not? So yeah, be pretty cool.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I grew up in a family that gave back. And so it was just instilled in my day, my week, and my budget, honestly. And so when I graduated from college, I became a banker and I wanted to help people. That was my work as a private banker, is to help them to achieve their financial goals. I relocated to Ohio after living on the East Coast and found that so many of the women I met just didn't see a way to get involved in the community. And that troubled me. So in the summer of 2001, started to write down all the reasons they told me they couldn't be involved. And one by one, I tried to overcome them. One of the things I learned is that not only if you grow up giving back, are you more likely to give back as an adult, but as the roles of women had changed in the United States in particular, although we've got chapters in New Zealand and Australia as well, women's philanthropy really hadn't kept pace. And so that's really what led me to start Impact 100. From there, it took off in a bigger and better way than I can ever imagine. And so we made our very first grant in the summer of 2001, $123,000, because 123 women came together. 20 years later, we've now grown 1,000-fold. And around the world, we've given away more than $123 million, $1,000 at a time, from women just like me, like all the women you might know in your lives. And it's been transformational all the way around.
Oh, that's awesome. Transformational for them, but also I think it would be transformational for you, right?
Completely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. And so what a wonderful way to be able to give back to people, to help them have a lift up, to do what they might want to do with it and so forth, which is really, really great to see. And so tell me a little more in the sense that we're going to be talking about leadership is changing and things like that today, but how did you actually get into leadership?
Well, I would say my first leadership role came the old-fashioned way. I climbed the corporate ladder. Banking is about as corporate as you can get, with a lot of hierarchy and structure. And so you do the right thing, you meet and exceed your goals, and you get a promotion and you get a promotion. So I had ascended to the role of senior vice president and regional manager in the bank, which was a decently high leader. However, becoming a leader on the nonprofit side is something entirely different. It's really not about corporate promotions and checking boxes and exceeding goals. It's really about standing up and saying, I see a problem that needs to be fixed, and I'm ready to take responsibility to do what I can where I am to help solve it. And when I ascended to that leadership, I was rather unlikely founder, being a banker and without a nonprofit pedigree, other than a lot of experience as a volunteer. But I think when these problems really start to bother us, I believe it's the universe's way of saying somehow we have a way to solve this problem and that we need to take action. And so, two different leadership journeys, very different, but the end is the same.
Yeah, interesting. Because quite interesting to hear about the difference between the corporate and the nonprofit, two different types of organizations. But for you to go up in different ranks throughout the corporate side of things and then into the non-for-profit side of things too, or not-for-profit, what was it like for you as a female going up the corporate ladder and climbing it? Was it difficult? How did you find it?
Well, yeah, I was one of the very few women at the time in my industry. So there were not a lot of women I could look up to as role models who'd already broken that glass ceiling. I was lucky though, because I did have the men in higher positions who believed in me. I think absent that, it would have been much more difficult. But I was also raised to be very hardworking and go the extra mile. And I think, especially as a woman in a corporate setting, but honestly, probably even today, regardless of your gender or your age or even your industry, it's that notion that you really have to go the extra mile, be attentive, and anticipate needs instead of just taking orders. Start acting like you're a leader before you're given the title, and suddenly people see you that way.
Yeah, it's interesting how you can act as the leader or do the things as a leader before you actually given the role or the actual title or whatever. Because a lot of people sit there going, well, give me this, give me that, and then I'll be the leader. It's like, no, because it's about
Mm.
becoming the leader and it's about you going in there and doing what you need to do. Yeah, that's excellent. That's fascinating what you just shared because I think a lot of people get that a little bit muddled up and the wrong way around. And I think it's important.
Yeah. And one other thing on that I've found, and I talk about this with younger women and men who are in corporate roles today, is that very often you have your eye on that next promotion, how you can lead. And in terms of your corporate structure, that you might hear, you don't have the skill set, you don't have the experience. Well, and then you say, well, how do I get it if you don't promote me? Well, one really good way to get it without getting the promotion is honestly through volunteer work. Because when you go out to the causes you care about and you volunteer to help them on lead a project or raise money or any of the myriad things that nonprofits need, suddenly you now get project management experience. You're increasing your network of both business and social contacts. You're learning from other mentors and leaders that might be outside your industry. In other words, again, when you go the extra mile, if you really want that promotion, you have to put yourself in the position of those men and women who are going to choose you or someone else for the next leadership role within the company. And getting the skills, even if you have to go outside of your company to do it, they're typically very transferable and it can differentiate you from the rest of your peers.
I'm in Chicago, so I'm on the other side of the pond.
Yeah. The other side of the pond. So it's like you said before, two guys on each side of the pond having a chat. And technology is wonderful. And speaking of technology, tell us a little bit more about your background because I think you've been involved quite a bit with technology.
Yeah, so my last 20 years has been in tech, in probably the most, or at least arguably one of the most complicated areas of tech, which is in healthcare. As you probably know, healthcare is the largest industry in our economy and probably the one with most issues and the one that's most in need of technology. So I really grew up being to grow up the market. So I was very involved in putting the infrastructure and the foundation in place for electronic health records. And for the last 10 years, I've done the same thing on the financial side of healthcare, really helping to clarify the cost of healthcare, make it easier to attack it.
And I see that you are the CEO and founder of an organization called In Common. Tell us more about that organization.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So after 20 years of health tech and really 30 years in healthcare, I decided to make a pretty big pivot. So I was 10 years in at running a company, had gone great. And so the wind was at our backs, but I didn't feel it. So it was, I don't know, in some ways the job had lost its challenge, I would say, Dennis. The other part of it was there was something else I think I needed to do that my prior job was time to do. So our company had become one of the top rated companies in the world in terms of employee experience on Glassdoor, which is the definitive standard.
Oh, yeah.
But during COVID, that started to change, and as it did with everybody. So I really left because I wanted to attack that problem. My really high level concept here, if you want to zoom out, would be that we're going through the biggest and fastest change in the history of how we work and live. And so we're really living history right now. So the question is how do we make the future different than the past? And that's what I left to go on a journey to research that, to reflect on that, and to share what I learned, and to help create potentially a solution to that problem.
Wow, I love that. And Dan, I know that you were a CEO of Strata before. That was a 500 plus people kind of tech company and so forth. But what I'm quite interested in to hearing what you just said there was that the wind was behind our backs, but I wasn't feeling it. And then you decided to move on to go and pursue that and find that. I think there's a lot of people today who are not happy or bored or really wanting that next challenge. And what would be some of the things that you went through to help you get out of where you are, to go into something else, to get that challenge, to do something else? What would be one or two things you might want to share with the listeners about what they should be thinking about or doing and preparing for that?
Yeah, well, what's maybe a little bit unique about me, I'm probably the one CEO who quit during the Great Resignation, right? Most people were trying to hold on to their jobs. I was left to find something that I felt could be that next challenge for me. And I'm a little bit of a long distance runner. So I have a marathon type of mentality. I tend to do things in essentially 10-year sprints or 10-year runs. So I was coming up on 10 years, and literally 10 years to the day that I left or that I joined the company, 10 years to the day, I decided that was going to be my last day. So here's what I would say to you. So I teach a class at a university here in Chicago called Loyola. And the class I teach is on decision strategy. So to me, the way I teach this class is that the decisions you make, yeah, those are important, but it's really what you make of your decisions, right? And so I think you can be in your job and it could be great or horrible. You can move and it could be great or horrible. The X factor is you and what you make of it. And so for me personally, I'm a bit of a challenge junkie. Like I need to feel like I'm doing something and that's progressive in terms of my personal growth. It turns out I'm not alone. So we'll get into it when you and I were talking about this a little bit before, when we chop it up. But there's really very consistent themes, and the data all points to the same exact reasons why people leave jobs for the most part. And we can talk a little bit more about that when you want to get into it. But for me, it was really simple. I needed a new challenge, right? And I wasn't feeling the things that I really valued about my job within my job anymore. So I was really somebody who had built high growth companies or helped build high growth companies based on culture. And when I say culture, here's what I mean. The feeling of the people who work for the company and also the customers who we serve.
Right.
And in both cases, and one company grew from 50 people to 5,000 people. The other company grew from 50 people to 500 people. In both cases, these were companies where people loved to work and customers loved to work with us. And so that feeling in many cases, Dennis, is not there for people right now. The workplace has become very transactional and very transitional. People don't feel that pride and purpose in work. And really what I thought was zooming out once again, no. We don't need to think about how to bring people back, quote, to work. We need to think about how to bring people forward to the future. And that's really what I've been spending my time on, is really taking this sort of negative narrative that's out there, which to me, when you have moments like this, they are target rich. Like I know your podcast is on leadership and oh my God, is it changing, right? But the one thing you always know about leadership is that crisis creates opportunity, right? And so when there's a problem, if you're and I don't want to call myself a leader, but if you feel like you're a leader, right? If anyone feels like they're a leader, boy, that's when you're like, this is my opportunity to prove it, right?
Yep. And I think it's the thought leader, right? It's how you actually put things into place. And well, I'm taking so many notes from what you've actually just been sharing and saying, because I want to get into these questions because I'm sure some more is going to be coming out of it. But I think a little bit later on is I love what you said about what you make of your decision is really important, right? And I think it's the question later on, if I don't get to it, I will think about it, and maybe you'll go through it when we go through our questions. But it's about when is the right time for a leader to lead, because sometimes I think they stay too long. And so we'll get into that. But the question I've got here for you, Dan, is how did you actually get into leadership?
Yeah, once again, I'll give it maybe a slightly different spin than most people you probably talk to. I would say when I was growing up, I was probably the last person who somebody would have pegged to be a leader, much less a CEO. I grew up incredibly introverted, and I had good reasons for it. I was dyslexic, so school was tough. I was a different kind of kid, so I was constantly bullied. And my father left before I turned 1 year old, so that pretty much killed my ability to trust anyone. So, but eventually I grew out of that. And over the last 30 years, I've been more or less on the journey. But I would say this, I've always been fascinated, even though I never thought I would be one. I was always fascinated by the topic, right? And really obsessed by it. So hundreds probably of books, hundreds of documentaries or biographies, however you want to look at those. But I didn't really get what leadership was until I did it, right? So my first shot at a leadership role was in my late 20s, managing a really small team, and I made really big mistakes. And so I learned from these mistakes, and I was interested in learning. So now I feel like I'm in a zone where I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and maybe have a different flavor or different perspective on leadership than maybe some other people. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think what you just said about learning from mistakes is really important for us all to do that. And what you're doing today in life and in business would have been those lessons of the past, the foundations of the past, setting you up to what you're doing today. And you probably wouldn't be doing what you're doing today without that experience.
Yeah, that's true. And I know both you and I share a common background in tech. And the one thing you learn about tech is it's iterative. So you don't think about mistakes or failures. It's like all part of the process. And I think over time, when you mature, you realize that it's hard when you're young to have that perspective, because we grow up being evaluated and graded. So we expect to have that same type of experience when we're working. And so we really condition people in exactly the wrong way to transition into work. And we have to spend some time, primarily our 20s, getting over ourselves and realizing it's not about a scorecard, right? It's really about helping people around you and advance the business that you're in, which is obvious, but it just takes a while to get that perspective down.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.